You'll have to excuse me now because I'm going to take a piss. Thank you.
Hello everybody, welcome back to the Flix Files. My name is of course Roger, and it's been a little while since I've uploaded a video, so I do apologise for that. I had a little bit of a break from filming, and we've had some lovely weather in the UK this week. It's been unseasonably warm, it's been beautiful, and I've spent quite a lot of time sat in my garden ruminating thinking about what sort of content I wanted to make on this channel. And I got thinking about the 1980s. And I've said before on this channel that the 1980s are just a terrific decade for movies. And I was 10 when the 1980s started, and I had all of my teenage years throughout that decade. And when I look back at all the films that I own in my collection, a big portion of them were from the 1980s. And the reason for that is there are many films that were released in that time that I so enjoyed as a kid that they've just stuck with me, and I've just enjoyed them now, even in my mid-50s. I can still watch them with a tremendous amount of excitement and fun. So rather than do one bloody great big long video talking about the whole of the 1980s, I thought, why not just do a series of 10 videos for each year. And for each year, I'll pick out a small handful of movies from my collection and talk about them. And hopefully by the end of this series of videos, you will agree with me that the 80s were a very strong time for cinema. And I've always said that the 80s were brilliant for the two genres of action and science fiction. And for those two types of movies, there were a lot that were released during the 80s that were just absolutely fantastic. And in some ways, they really raised the bar for the kind of movies that we have today with the likes of Marvel and things like that. Yeah, so I thought I'll give it a go, and hopefully you'll stick with me and you won't tail off after like 1983. So I'm gonna just keep doing these and not deviate from it for a while now. So hopefully you'll stick with me. So let's get into it. Let's talk about 1980. Now I've done a video previously where I talked about how I decide what movie I'm gonna watch, which sounds really silly, but to me it was quite an important topic, because if you have a bucket load of films in your collection and you don't have a particular movie in mind, how the hell do you decide what you're going to watch? And I came up with a system of cataloguing all my films and then organising them chronologically by the year that they were made. So I now have a list for every year, and it will show what movies I own that were made in that year. So I've just looked at this list and picked out my 4 sort of top films from each of those years. And that's what I'm going to do. So the first of these 4 picks that I've chosen for 1980 is a little movie that you may have heard of called The Empire Strikes Back. Because it's a very important movie, and the fact that this was released right at the beginning of this decade that I'm talking about just highlights how important of a decade it's going to be for science fiction. And there isn't really much I can say about The Empire Strikes Back that's not been said a billion times before. Suffice to say that it is widely regarded by Star Wars fans and critics as the best Star Wars movie ever made. And I'd agree with that, but I would say that the original Star Wars movie is still my favorite. And I think that's purely for nostalgic reasons. And I did a video a couple of weeks ago all about that, where I talked about Star Wars memories and things and how it meant so much to me as a little 7-year-old. And if you haven't watched that movie and you're kind of around my age in your 50s, you might find that quite interesting. So I'll just put a little link up here. But I've picked out The Empire Strikes Back as my first choice for 1980 because it is a very important movie. And as a second part to a trilogy, it's a terrific kind of middle chapter in that after the celebration and success of Star Wars, in terms of the rebellion destroying the Death Star and defeating the Empire, we then move into the second picture where we learn that the Empire is by no means down and out. They're very much still a very strong force to be reckoned with. And we have the opening sequence where the remaining rebels are holed up in a rebel base on the ice planet of Hoth, and they get attacked by the Imperials, who send down these huge Imperial walkers to blast the rebel base to pieces. So it's just this terrifically lavish tour de force of very early industrial light and magic special effects, and just a great piece of action cinema. And during the course of this, our main characters are kind of fragmented off in different directions. So Han and Leia end up escaping on the Falcon, and Luke Skywalker heads off to Dagobah to be trained in the ways of being a Jedi by Yoda. And the movie plays out to the point that as we get to the end of the film, we learn a lot more about the characters in this film and how Han and Leia are obviously developing feelings for one another. And we learn of Luke's relationship with Darth Vader. And it's a terrific middle chapter because it ends in such a way that it doesn't have the bombastic celebratory ending that Star Wars had. It ends in a way that just makes you desperately want to see the next chapter. So in that respect, it's very clever. And the fact that this is a character-driven movie as opposed to a special effects-driven movie is testament to how brilliant it is. And suffice to say, all of the 4 movies that I've picked for this video to talk about, I own them all on 4K. So the fact that I've upgraded them to the best possible quality that's available in the 21st century so far shows how much they mean a lot to me. And just having them on DVD or Blu-ray wasn't enough. I had to own them in the best possible quality. So yeah, that's my first choice for 1980, is The Empire Strikes Back. And my second choice is a wonderful musical comedy directed by John Landis, The Blues Brothers. Now, The Blues Brothers is just a terrific tour de force of John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd. And I have a very interesting history with this film because my late brother, he was about 6 years older than me. And I remember he went to see this at the cinema when it first came out. And I remember him coming back and sort of giving me a potted version of what the story was about. And it didn't really make much sense what he was telling me. And I desperately wanted to see it for a few years. But during the 1980s, the Blues Brothers had it was sort of entangled in some sort of legal issues that prevented it from being released on videotape in the UK. So it was a very, very difficult film to be able to see. And the first time I watched the Blues Brothers was on a really poor quality pirate copy that we managed to obtain from somewhere. God knows when. It's been so many years now, I can't remember. But I do remember watching this ratty copy of the Blues Brothers for the first time. And then eventually, as we got in towards the latter half of the 1980s and the early part of the 1990s, I think the legal issues surrounding it were resolved, and it did eventually get a proper VHS rental release. And it was one of those films, much like when Crocodile Dundee first came out on videotape, that was so difficult to get a copy to rent. It was always out of the shop. And it was weeks and weeks and weeks before we finally were able to get a rental copy and watch a better quality version of it, shall we say. And of course, over the years, I've owned it on DVD, Blu-ray, and now this wonderful 4K. And it's just a fantastically fun movie, and it gives me lots of warm, fuzzy memories of my dad because he was a huge fan of this film. And any opportunity to sit down with my dad and watch The Blues Brothers was always a great time because he just loved it as a movie. And my dad always liked American movies that involve car chases. So he very much loved things like Duel and The Cannonball Run and Smokey and the Bandit and things like that. And of course, The Blues Brothers has this terrific car chase at the end of it that's just absurdly over the top, but just brilliant in its execution. And at some point on this channel, I'm going to do a top 5 car chases. And I'm sure The Blues Brothers will be in that top 5 somewhere because it deserves to be. It's just absolutely brilliant. And I'm aware they did a sequel to this, Blues Brothers 2000. And I've never seen it. I don't want it to tarnish my feelings of this original movie because to me it's perfect. It's lightning in a bottle. And yeah, I just love it so much. Interestingly, I hate musicals. I can't think if I own any other musical in my collection other than Little Shop of Horrors, I think, is the only other one. But The Blues Brothers is a musical. But I love it so much because the music in it, the blues music played by the band, is just bloody fantastic. And I actually had the soundtrack to this film at some point on a compact disc in the 90s. God knows what happened to it. It just got lost in the mist of time. But yeah, that's my second choice for 1980. So already we're off to an incredibly strong start with those first 2 movies. So my third choice for 1980 is the science fiction movie Flash Gordon. Now, this is interesting because when I think of science fiction movies that I really love of that period, things like Alien and Blade Runner, they have aged incredibly well. And I've often said that you could watch Alien and Blade Runner, and if it wasn't for the fact that the actors that you know in them look very young, there's very little in those films to give away their age. They have a fantastic design core running through them that makes them sort of timeless. Whereas Flash Gordon has aged terribly. But that is its charm. I can remember being bowled over by its campness and its bombasticness when I first saw this way back in 1980. And with every passing year, it just looks more and more like a film of its time. But to me, that just adds to its charm. I just love it so much. It's got really dodgy visual effects. And some of the costumes in it are just absolutely incredibly over the top, that they're laughable. But it just all comes together to make it just such a fun movie. And I think a lot of it is down to the cast and the main players in the film all do a really bang-up job in performing the roles that they had, you know, with Sam Jones as Flash Gordon and Topol as Dr. Zarkov and Max von Sydow as Ming the Merciless and Peter Wingard as Max von Sydow's sort of right-hand man. He's got a fantastic voice. You never get to see his face. He's always behind that gold mask, but he has a wonderful way of speaking that makes him sound very theatrical. And of course, the absolutely glorious Brian Blessed, possibly the most famous role that he's ever played. And it's just a terrific, fun movie. And it's a delight having this on 4K because the colours of this movie are just so absurdly over the top. And the HDR of the 4K really brings out the whole glory of the thing. It's fantastic. And while I'm talking about Flash Gordon, I think I've mentioned this in another one of my very early videos, but way back when this movie was about to release, there was a cereal breakfast company that did a promotion for the movie, Weetabix. And for a while they had a series of collectible movie cards in their packets, and I think there was about 15 or 20 in total, and I've got them. I actually collected them as a 10-year-old, and I've still got them. And I'll never get rid of them. They're just one of the few things that I'm really glad that I didn't throw away. I also have a similar thing that was done with Star Trek the Motion Picture in 1979. But they're really cute little cards and they have little stills from the movie. And I can remember collecting them as a 10-year-old before I even saw the movie and just studying the pictures really closely to look at these particular images. And, you know, it was nice when I saw the movie for the first time and saw where those pictures happened throughout the story. And it's just a cute little thing that I still have. So I kind of keep those in my steel book of Flash Gordon that I have. So yeah, that's my third choice. Wonderful, wonderful film. I probably will do deep dives on all of these further down the line, because now I'm thinking about a particular movie and I'm talking about it, I just want to keep going. So it's a shame I've got to move on to the next one. But my fourth and final choice for 1980 is an absolute masterpiece of a film. And this is the movie The Shining, starring Jack Nicholson. And I first saw this movie on British television when it was broadcast. So it must have been about 1984, 1985, I'm going to guess. So I would have been about 14 or 15 years old. And I can remember when it was on at the cinema and my mum and my younger sister went to see it. Unfortunately, I was too young at the time. I vividly remember them saying that they were going to see it at the cinema, but I don't remember their reaction when they came back. And if you own this movie on Blu-ray or 4K, there is a terrific making of documentary about The Shining that was made by one of Stanley Kubrick's daughters, Vivian Kubrick, who went around with her own little I think it was like a 16mm camera that she had, and she filmed some behind the scenes footage. And that was primarily broadcast on the BBC in 1980. And I remember watching that on its original broadcast. So that was the first time I saw footage from The Shining. And the other thing about The Shining that I always think of is when I first saw The Shining and I realized it was by the chap that did 2001: A Space Odyssey, and I could see the similarities in the way he used the camera and the way he used camera movement to present a kind of mood and slow zooms and things like that. And it's the first time that really was noticed in my mind with a particular director, that here we had a filmmaker that had such a unique way of making movies that you could see his fingerprint all over it. And that continued throughout the rest of his career. Well, the rest of his career, bless him, he only made 2 more movies after The Shining. But when you look at the whole body of his work as a whole, you can see that DNA of Kubrick running all the way through it. And just the way he used lenses and camera movement, it was just fantastic. And it's a terrific film, and I've seen it dozens and dozens of times, and probably will see it dozens of times more throughout the rest of my life. And it's a terrific 4K. It's absolutely superb quality. Again, I've owned this on just about every format that's been made available. So it's an absolute delight to have a movie of that caliber on such a wonderful format like 4K, where the quality is probably even better than it was when it was originally released in the cinemas, which is incredible to think, but it's probably true. So there we are. That is my choice of 4 movies to hopefully highlight some of the brilliance that appeared in cinemas during the 1980s, during the year of 1980. So stick around, and at some point soon I will be doing another video about 1981 where I'll pick a few more movies from that year, and hopefully you'll agree with my choices. If there are other films that were released during 1980 that you felt I should have picked out, please let me know. I do own other movies from that year, but these are the ones that I felt were sort of raised the bar for cinema. during 1980. So I'd be interested to know if there are others that you felt I should have included. So thanks for watching. If you enjoyed that, give me a thumbs up, and I will see you very, very soon. Bye for now.